and I know manipulation you described is a very broad thing, but I'm talking about the so-called negative manipulation. Is there a particular one, without being extreme around beating people up, that you think is, I don't know, is it right to say the most manipulative? I mean, is there even a scale on it? How do you measure it? And is there something that's like the worst, or the worst one that people might hold as part of a personality trait?
Well, if we think of worst as being like most damaging to a person's psyche and quality of
Sure.
life, right?
Yeah, that's good.
I don't think violence is the worst. And I mean, sexual abuse of a child is pretty bad. But I don't know if that's it really counts as the manipulation we're talking about when you just force yourself on somebody. And that's why, say, like randomly getting punched by a stranger in the street rather than staying in a relationship, or being sexually abused by someone by force. I don't think it's in the same category of what we're talking about. It's more like losing a fight. So if we rule out those that are clearly sort of, well,
most
I don't
extreme.
think actually people recover from violence a lot better than they do from emotional manipulation. Therapists around the world have their calendars booked out because of parental emotional manipulation. Right? The damage it does when you're still forming your brain, and you don't have critical thinking, and you don't have the kind of frontal lobe performance that you need to like withstand the external world. Like, it forms you as a person. It limits your options permanently. So I'd say the most harmful, in a very broad generic sense, is bad parenting.
Wow.
And one of the things I've learned a lot about more recently is the first 3 years, the shit you don't even remember. That's where a lot of the main damage is done. And it isn't done with the hurtful comments and stuff like you get with the, say, the mum and the teenage girl, that kind of nasty, spiteful stuff, or the man up and don't cry like you get from the father to the son, and all the classic stuff that we talk about a lot. Though that stuff is devastating. I'm in work because that stuff exists. Without that stuff, we have a happy, healthy world. It's as simple as that. But in the first 3 years, I'll give you an example because I've only just become aware of this being a father and starting to research that element of psychology, which I'd ignored for most of my career. Like, I'm not that interested in infants, but now I am. And we were out with somebody. They're not a bad person or anything, but this was bad. I was somebody, and she was talking to my wife. She had her 1-year-old-ish in the pram, and the kid started crying, grizzling, just woken up from his sleep. Without looking, the mum grabs a pacifier and just shoves it into the baby's mouth and literally holds it there by force.
What's a pacifier? A dummy?
A dummy, yeah.
Oh yeah, sure. Okay.
And just holds it there by force. Didn't even make eye contact with the kid. And I was like, you have no idea how damaging it is to do that. The messaging you just gave that child was horrendous. The no eye contact, no acknowledgement, no recognition. The shut up, you're inconvenient message. Like, your emotions are inconvenient to me, so I will literally squash them. I was like, oh, that's how it's done. So a lot of us, we have issues with attachment. That's one of the biggest issues we have, or at least in my field of work. We struggle to trust people, or we cling to people, or both. We push and pull. We can't seem to like have a connection we feel safe and healthy with. We don't realize that in the first 3 years of our life, a lot of that damage was done. And it was done often with good intentions. There's this Ferber method where you leave a baby to cry itself to sleep. And it's supposed to kind of like just toughen the kid up and, learn how to sleep on your own.
I've personally just put it out there. I've never agreed with that, but that's just.
Well, you shouldn't. The data shows that you really shouldn't.
Yeah.
And a lot of parents listening to this might be feeling quite defensive right now because they tried it and it seemed to work and their kid seems to be fine. And look, it's recoverable, but you need to understand what you did. You told that baby when it cries and when it's distressed, no one's coming for it.
Yeah.
It's on its own. It can't trust anybody. It can't rely on anybody. It's in this cold, dark world where it can't see, it can't understand what's happening, and it's left alone. The reason it stopped crying is because it went inside.
Yeah.
It went, nobody's coming for me. And then later on, when you're like, why won't my teenage daughter talk to me about anything? Oh, that's just teenagers. No, that's avoidant attachment.
Mm-hmm.
That someone who said, when I cry, no one helps me, I'm on my own. And they formed a belief before they even knew what beliefs were, before they even had language. So when you ask, like, what's the most damaging, it's the stuff that happens. And honestly, like, a bit of that stuff can be counterbalanced.
Mm-hmm.
So to give some hope to parents that, like, thought they were using the right method, they really love their kid and they're trying to help and they're following what the doctor says, and the doctor actually gets it wrong in this particular case. If you're a very loving, encouraging, supportive parent the rest of the time, don't worry about it. It'll counteract it. You're not going to have a damaged kid. But if you're also emotionally distant, too busy with work, angry at them every time they cry, yeah, that's going to do some damage.
Mm-hmm.
There's not enough counterbalance. You can fuck things up in relationships. You can accidentally be a bit of a people pleaser or a bit narcissistic or a bit this and that, as long as it's just a bit. And the rest heals it, But if it's more than a bit, and I can't define what a bit is, there's just a line where it stops being counteracted, where it doesn't get healed, where it starts to grow a cancerous kind of psychological tumor that will eventually kill whatever's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of people just don't realize that that's what happened to them as kids. There's very little subtle things,
Totally agree.
Yeah, it's damaging.
It's interesting when you said when people defend that. I mean, obviously the conversation today isn't around how you raise children, but it is very significant about, I left, when somebody says, I left my child to cry and it didn't do any damage and it worked. Well, first of all, what do you mean by worked? Basically, it made your life easier. That's what you mean by worked. It made my life easier because I could get to sleep more easily, or I could get back to work more quickly, or I didn't have the inconvenience of having to hold an ongoing crying child that's given up on putting the hand up saying, I need some help right now, but nobody's coming. So I'll just give up and I'll go inside, like you said. So what do they mean by it worked? And because I've heard people say the same thing. And when people say, well, it didn't cause any damage to my kid because they've got, 10 A stars at GCSE or they're going to university. Well, how are you measuring what damage it did? Are you measuring by their success? Because that in its own right, achievements, because that in its own right can also be quite damaging as well, when you only recognize a kid for what they achieve rather than who they are. What you're basically saying to them is that I recognize you for what you do rather than who you are, and that in its own right can be in direct parallel relation to that particular pattern that we're referring to when they're a kid anyway, that dismissiveness of their human birthright needs versus, oh yeah, but it shows that they're fine because they're achieving something. And the two are very, very different. And it's good to recognize, it's very important to recognize your kids for both. If they do something good, obviously pat them on the back and give them high fives and chest pumps, whatever you want to do. But to recognize them for the stuff they're not physically achieving as well, I think is so overlooked in our society to raise a stable human race. Would you agree?
Yeah, look, sometimes I think my standards are too high, but I would have to say that most people are not ready to be parents, and that most societies are not set up well for families. It's interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine who he kind of exclusively dates international women, and so he gets this range of cultures brought into his life. And one of his girlfriends was Mexican, and she came over to New Zealand. She said one of the weirdest things when she got here was hearing babies crying all the time. She said, you don't hear it where I live, because you live in a fucking house with 12 family members. The baby's needs get met constantly. In certain African tribal cultures, a baby's feet doesn't touch the ground for like 3 years. They're constantly coddled, constantly held. They turn out just fine, psychologically speaking. They turn out to be powerful leaders, loving mothers, whatever. They turn out fine. So the ideas that we have, especially in Western culture, around how to raise kids, it's how to raise industrious workers. It's not how to raise healthy human beings. So we end up with these industrious, look at my industrious little kid. You mean the one that can't like connect with people? Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
You mean the one that looks in the mirror and goes, you're not good enough? Is that the one you're talking about? The one that won't talk to you about their deep inner problems because they don't trust you? Is that the kid you're so proud of? The worst I see is like, I got hit as a kid and I turned out fine. No, you didn't. Or you didn't turn out as good as you could have. Definitely not. There's no way violence improves you as a person. There's no fucking way. There's no psychological paper on earth that's ever given any validity to that idea, and there's plenty that have gone against it. if you say something like that, like, you know, I got hit and I turned out fine, what you're saying is, I got conditioned to believe that violence against children is healthy. Now say it like that and tell me that you turned out fine, right? It'd be like, I got sexually abused as a kid and I turned out fine, right? You wouldn't say that. So you wouldn't promote it as a parenting tool, right? But as you said, the tragedy is that to raise somebody, and let's go away from parenting, just to be in a healthy connection with people, it's a hassle to do it right. Here's the thing, manipulation, this is what I was thinking about before our call, you know, I was looking at kind of the prompts and what we might talk about. And one of the things that's become very clear to me over the last couple of years, and I already knew it back when I was working with offenders, is the most motivating force is the most ridiculous one: avoidance of a hassle. We get very motivated by guilt, we get motivated by the pursuit of pleasure, we get motivated by frustration, but ironically, a lot of our decisions every day, a majority perhaps, are just trying to reduce hassle. We don't like hassle, and everybody's got a different definition of that word. What hassle is for them. They're very active people, but a hassle is like having to wait for something. Or someone like me, a hassle is being active. So from the beginning, whether it's parenting a child, whether it's being with a partner, whether it's hanging out with our friends, a lot of our manipulation towards other people is trying to reduce the amount of hassle they're going to be for us. Often the amount of emotional hassle. It's uncomfortable for me to be around someone grieving, so I'll cheer them up. You know, it's agitating for me to be around people who are bored, so I'll entertain them. Right? It's scary for me to be around someone who's angry, so I'll calm them down. And we're constantly like, you're too much effort for me emotionally. I need to reduce you, right? And this is how not only we manipulate others. Like in my line of work, I'm actually dealing with people and the way they manipulate others more than the way they're being manipulated. I mean, it goes both ways. You work on your own shit and you start to see it coming from others. So working on your own shit is the best way to tackle this. It kind of covers everything. But when you start to see, like, how often do I do something with the primary motivation of making their emotional state more comfortable for me, it becomes very uncomfortable to see how much you do it. To just go, wow, it's like a little bit of everything I say has some of that in it. You know, and this was a very, very painful wake-up call for me in my mid-20s. It didn't happen in a single epiphany, just have a series of stages, an ongoing revelation over time, where I was like, do I even not do this? You know, like, is it everything? Is it everything I've ever done? Is my career based on this? Do I have a career that just shuts everyone up? Is that really why I chose it? You know, when I go out drinking every weekend, when I go to the nightclubs that I don't even enjoy, is that just so my mates will be comfortable around me? Like, not to mention every sentence out of my fucking mouth, is it just designed to put someone in a state that I enjoy? Why am I so funny all the time? Why do I put so much effort into that fucking stand-up comedy performance that I do in every social situation? Because I like people laughing. It's less hassle than being sad or serious or arguing. And I was just like, shit, please don't tell me that's the only reason I do this, because it's starting to look like it's the only fucking reason I do this, you know? Anyway, like I said, when we talk about the most harmful, it really can just come down to the fact that we're just trying to stop people being a hassle. We don't want to put in the effort that healthy connections require. A parent doesn't feel like they have the time, and sometimes they, because of the way society functions in the Western world, they don't have the time and support needed to do the right thing, the long, painful thing that you got to do for the kid to develop properly, the spending time with them, the letting them cry in your arms, the letting them feed themselves even though they make a massive mess, the whatever, the letting them ask their 400,000 questions a day and answering them. It's a fucking hassle. But if you put that effort in, you're going to end up with, as somebody says it, Dr. Gabor Mate says, if you get the first 3 years right, you don't have to do anything else. And that's pretty much it. Like, you get that toddler development right, they're going to be so fucking confident they'll take off on their own. That you won't have to worry about them. They'll climb the trees without falling. They'll stand up to the bully. You know, they'll resist the shit from the teachers that isn't right, and whatever. They'll do everything they need to be a healthy person. But you get that first 3 years wrong, if you make them into a little slave that tries to be convenient, the rest of the world's going to dominate them as well.
Very interesting. I think what was the point that you just, oh yeah, it reminded me of when this hassle topic, I'd never looked at it like that, but I think it's very, very true. But it's also, we kind of go back to the child rearing again, but it's so related that it's why so many parents just hand their kids like a tablet or some form of device where they're busy. Let's go, right, just watch TV or just watch. I mean, if they're busy, fair enough, they've got specific, I've got to get this washing up done, or I've got to put the washing on, fair enough. But some people just can't be asked to just interact with them because it takes a lot of patience to read the alphabet 57 times. It takes a lot of patience to count to 10 420 times in a day. Whereas actually that's the part that is the most needed, I guess, at that age. I mean, I don't have children, but from the small research I've done on very, very young kids. But the hassle part is just, it's so much easier just to chuck them a laptop, or so much easier to chuck them a tablet. And then it creates that whole addiction. And it's also another reason why I think we're so obsessed with our phones as a world. And to a degree, technology has manipulated us, because they actually, a lot of these like applications, like the obvious ones, Facebook, Instagram, everything else, and just the way that they're designed, they've hired people that know how to basically manipulate our minds, and they're designed in a particular way that we're actually feeding the trap which we've been set for us by using these devices so much. So, and we start them off these days at such a young age. Like, I openly admit I spend too much time on my phone. I run an online business, I'm always on technology of some nature, but I certainly miss it when it's taken away from me. Like if I'm out somewhere and my phone dies, I feel a bit, oh my God, I hate it. Like I don't have that immediate connection with the world. So it's definitely there. And I didn't even have a mobile till I was in my mid-20s. So imagine what that's like when you've been programming somebody to be manipulated by technology in that way since they were 7 or 6 in some instances, even younger in some instances, you know. So it's quite frightening when you think of it like that, of what that could lead to if you fast forward 4 decades of that programming and reprogramming. And it also explains why we've got such a disconnected society, and why so many people are behaving in a manipulative way, because they're sometimes not even aware of what those social cues are, because they spent so much time focused staring into their phone.
And all the other ways as well, you know, like generally, like let's say you have a mother that guilt trips you. Well, guess what her mum did to her? This is how she learned to communicate her needs. This is how she thinks it works. She doesn't even think. It's just, this is how talking happens. It's like if you read 1984 by George Orwell, you know, the constant theme is that they're rewriting the language so people can't actually think for themselves. They're limiting the language in such a way where you're forced to have the kind of thinking that they want, because the language is thinking, you know. It's such a great idea that generally we're raised to manipulate by people who were manipulating us. You know, it's as well. But at this point, you're also touching on the solution. You know, you said that feeling you get when you're away from technology. If you ever want to break your addiction to technology, you go in the bush for 2 weeks and you prove to yourself that you don't need it. You remind yourself that you never needed it. If you want to break your dependency in relationships, you stay single on purpose for as long as you possibly can. You know, if you think that your friend circle manipulates you, move to another city, be on your own. One of the key elements to recovery, or should I say to building a resilience and a healthy skepticism and ability to manage manipulation, is to be willing to lose the thing you're attached to that made you easy to manipulate. Maybe it's an identity you need to lose. Maybe it's a sense of security. Maybe it's validation. There's something you need to lose and show yourself that you can survive without it. You know, for me, it was identity. I wanted to be seen as the nice guy. That was the thing that anybody could use against me. You know, my friends at the time, they used it to make me their entertainment. You know, it was really hard to look back on it to realize I was only invited to things if they wanted to laugh. If somebody funnier was there, I didn't get invited. I was like, oh, that stings. I don't actually have friends. You know, I thought I had lots of them. I don't. I have an audience. An audience that's looking for a cheap deal, you know? But my attachment to being the funny guy, it compelled me to be the funny guy, which is also me manipulating them. So we're going back and forth with circular here. Manipulation's almost always circular. One of the interesting things you'll see in domestic violence cases is how often the woman usually, but men get beaten too, but how often the woman will provoke the violence. It's 50-50 quite often. You know, she could leave, but she doesn't. There's always the victim's also manipulating in their own way. Both people are essentially a victim to each other. Now, one person could be far more malicious and deliberate than the other person, but manipulation's a dance. It's 50-50.
Yeah.